how to read cross-platform digital networks. It's a question that I've been asking myself for a while and trying to find out some answers about it. And read here in the sense of understanding the meaning of a digital network and everything that comes with it. So not only how nodes are connected or how connections are made, the graphical representation, but also the different grammars and mechanisms inherent to internet platforms. So what I propose to do today is to bring a reflection on the trajectory that makes digital networks visible and ready to be explored. And to do that, I am not addressing big data research, neither statistics metrics. What I'm trying to do it is to do something different, and I don't know if it works. I hope so. And in the end of this short talk, you can give me a sort of feedback and help me with that. But before I start, I just wanted to bring to situate my short talk, and after that, I'm going to show you three aspects that we may want to consider in analyzing digital networks. So, just to bring our idea how we understand digital networks and in terms of definition. And these, Tommaso Venturini and colleagues, they actually bring a very good understanding on digital networks because they prescribed at the same time a conceptual metaphor, an analytical computational technique, a set of data, and a socio-technical system. And this is the same way we understand these networks. And having things in mind and also thinking that digital networks may offer discrete representations of social and cultural phenomena, how can we study them? What can be seen? What can be analyzed? So let me bring just a few examples. So for instance, having some insights from co-link connections is a way of approaching digital networks. Or the idea of detecting influential actors, bridging nodes. Not only that, but also to grasp conversations and the flow of conversations. It's another possibility. Or we may want to find out associations and affinities, and also the lack of them. And in this case, if you look at, for instance, the Portuguese University's Facebook page-like network on Facebook, we may want to think about institutional recognition or particular interests of the universities. And in this case, ISCTE, for instance, has a great interest in connecting with international university in Portuguese higher education, which is something we haven't seen in the other universities. Or we can point to the study of issue networks, the polarized and polarized perspectives. In this case, you see an image network of Brazilian polarized perspective last year before the presidential elections. So you see the ele sim, he's not, and it helped me to translate. Ele sim, ele não.
Not him.
Not him. Not him, and yes, he. And also interesting here is like part of the textual and visual content of these highlighted clusters were generated by automated accounts. Not forgetting to mention image networks and the rich analytical perspective that these types of networks brings with it. In this case, we see how Google Vision API has labeled more than 10,000 images related to the hashtag fanboy. So I have just brought some examples, and the idea that we have, like the concept or definition of digital networks. But the thing is, with all these networks, they are a result from a process of approaching or studying with computational techniques, with digital methods. And in approaching these networks, we may want to consider these following aspects, but today I am not exactly discussing about the choice of the platform or strategies to data collection or to data analysis. I'd like to think in something that go beyond this unstable way of being of the internet platforms, and to think of what could be definitive in this very same process. So what simultaneously precedes and takes place with and in the analytical approach of studying digital networks. And to do that, I believe that we could consider these three interconnected stages. And so a first step towards reading cross-platform digital networks is to look at the differences, because internet platforms has not only different cultures of use, but different grammars, different mechanisms attached to them. And that's why we may want to think about the platform infrastructure and its ready-made social data. We may wanna know about what is the possible types of digital networks we can study. And actually, how can we combine the knowledge of platform grammatization with the practice of data capture and data analysis? But the problem is, when we first start to studying these networks, we get fascinated by what we see. So we look at the grammars, we look at the nodes, and we pose questions when analyzing these networks related to what we see. But my question is, what comes before this visuality, right? So there is a requirement for more questions, actually. The characteristics of the platform. Is it a directed, undirected, mono, bipartite network? Which platform are we talking about? Which network? What am I seeing? What am I analyzing in terms of spatialization? Am I talking about like connections, conventions, audience reactions, layers of recommendations? So, and I think these questions somehow must be there in the process of studying digital networks. And I brought an example, a case study that actually was done last year in the DMI summer school, that actually this group, they have considered these all questions. And they will study the layers of recommendations of the app stores, and they asked what happens when you search for something you are not supposed to find, such as porn apps. So this is an example of how Google Play Store redirects our attention when we were searching for porn apps. And what they did in this study, beyond mapping relatedness or related apps, it was actually they saw embedded practices suggested by the platform itself. And they found out 3 layers of recommendation in these networks. So the first layer, it was porn inhibitors, apps. And the second layer, porn facilitators. In the third layer, social media and video chats and app chats. And how they did that, so they considered the characteristics of the platform, how Google's discovery algorithm works, and the role of spatialization in the platform. And actually, when they look at the third layer of recommendation related to social media, it was not arbitrary, the reference, because actually Tumblr and Snapchat, Bigo Live, they are more connected and related to porn apps, to porn facilitators. And now moving to the possible types of networks. Of course, you may have seen different types of networks, core hashtags, links, page-like, image networks. But in this field, I'd like to think in two broad categories that we may think about digital networks. And if we recall this idea of networks as captured by digital data, we may want to think in networks afforded by internet, by technical interfaces, and networks afforded by digital data. What I mean by that? In the first case, it's how the platform render, store, and made available data for us through APIs. So we use these softwares like NetVis, YouTube Data Tools, and other softwares that call directly to the technical interface. So you have this sort of, for instance, a page-like network on Facebook, a user source network on Twitter. In the second case, it's not necessarily a representation organized by the technical interface of the platform, but something we can build up, something we can make. For instance, a core-term Instagram caption, image label network, because we can have the data, because we can access digital data, so we can build this type of network. And then we have another question. So how can we combine this knowledge of platform grammatization with the practice of data capture and data analysis? So these are another more layers of technical knowledge and questions that we may want to consider. For instance, the choice of the platform, which grammar we're talking about, how about how we're going to access the data. Is it scraping? Is it APIs, calling? How about the extraction software, analysis software? But most importantly, in this process, I think it is we question ourselves, how can my current research can benefit from these possible types of network? What can I do with that? How can my research benefit from that? So different platforms suggest different ways of reading digital networks. This was this first part. And a second step toward reading digital networks, it is the graphical representation. And then in this case, we pay less attention to statistics and more attention to the visual affordances of the network. So which means we should care about the force-driven algorithms commonly used to shape and set the shape of the network, and actually look at the node positioning, size, and color, and be aware that this is an analytical decision in the process of studying digital networks. So just a quick note about force-directed layouts. They are aesthetically pleasing because they minimize edge crossing, and they calculate just the information that they've got in the structure of the graph, not considering or not relying on domain-specific knowledge. And they work under this logic of repulsive and attractive forces, which means that you can rotate the network without distorting information, and the position of one node depends on the position of the other node and the density of their connections. In this case, I mean, the spatial distance here somehow becomes meaningful. So among different types of force-directed layouts algorithms, Force Atlas 2 has been very much used to study social media networks. And there is a simple reason for that. Beyond being a continuous algorithm, it only stops when you say so. It creates a balanced state in the visualization of the network, which helps a lot in the process of the interpretation of the data. And this is how, because this is a question that I've been asking myself also for a while, how can we think then the spatialization logic of Force Atlas 2 with platform digital data? And no, this is not a solar system. It may look like, but this is somehow a way that I try to think the logic of spatialization. So in the center of the network is where you will find the most connected nodes, or the most mentioned hashtags, or the most recommended videos. And after that, you have a sort of midterm field, is that where you will find, because it's not yet periphery, not yet center, but you will find like the bridging nodes, and you will find empty spaces in your visualization. That is really important too. And then you have the periphery, is like a place that you will find different perspectives of your main topic that it should be in the center. And the isolated items, they are always going to be there, but they are isolated, but there is a reason for that. There is a reason they are there, so do not just ignore them. And beyond spatialization, another quick note I'd like to bring is like the role and the idea of node size and color, which is actually an analytical decision that requires not only technical knowledge, but also knowledge on your subject of studying. And in this case, the color of the nodes, it was related to comments, because they were studying these self-disclosure posts of Os Truques da Imprensa. It's a page, a Portuguese page on Facebook. And they highlighted comments because they were interested in the audience reactions to that comment. So you see in tones of gray, those who has between 2 and 9 comments, tones of in blue, those who has 1 comment, and in white, those who liked, who share, but did not commented. And the size of the node here relates to users' reactions and relates to the reactions that the page post has received. All is all about an analytical decision, because this visualization could be completely different. But as soon as they were looking at comments, so that's the analytical decision of this particular study. And another very important question we may want to think about is what to look at networks. So we should either look at the whole and its parts, and considering the relative position of the node, not only clusters, but what separates them, the empty spaces. And when looking at clusters, we should care about the cluster formation and composition, because it will change regarding the platform. So how that cluster was constituted, what sort of connections made that clusters constituted. So there's just some things that we should care and consider in the process of reading digital networks. And now, moving to the last part of this really short talk, it is the navigational practice. Because we can do our analysis, can move from the micro to the macro levels. And there is also a very particular technique, also known as visual network analysis, proposed by Tommaso Venturini and colleagues, that helps a lot in the way we read digital networks. So, which is, quoting then, an interactive process where meanings and findings are progressively and hermeneutically generated. And as I mentioned before, the visual network analysis pays special attention to node position, size, and color. So what I'm going to do now is to bring some questions, some key questions related to visual network analysis that may help you in the process of analyzing different networks. So for instance, what counts and what should we ignore or delete? In this case, as I've mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned before, but this highlight content, most of part of this textual and visual content was generated by automated accounts. And these very same images hit a week before the first elections, presidential elections in Brazil last year. They hit between 5 and 10 different web entities across the web. So should we ignore this content because they were generated by automated accounts, or should we embrace them in our research process? what is visible but irrelevant. So in this case, we have, it is very common to delete nodings sometimes. It helps to analyze your network. And in this case, the removal of climate change, which was the main node of this network, helped in detecting clusters. So at the top, you have those more connected to environment, nature, sustainability, earth, and at the bottom, related to politics, opposition to Trump, and feminism and LGBT causes, for instance. And what is hidden but important? In the same network that I show you in the other slide, we detect this tag named resist, and due to this positioning in the network. And resist it was actually a tag that connects the clusters at the top with the clusters at the bottom. So this is another thing another question to think about. What is hidden but important? And what needs to be described and highlighted? A description is always welcome when studying digital networks. I think it's always good to describe and take notes on everything you're doing during the process of analysis. And here you see two versions of the same network of the tag. There won't be a coup. It's related to Brazilian protests in 2016. And the coup at the time, it was the impeachment process against Dilma Rousseff, the then president. And what you see on one side, colors emphasizing clusters, which means, okay, you have clusters and you have different forms of conversational support apparently supporting there won't be a coup. On the other side, you see what was hidden but not identified. It was actually in yellow, the coup, it is actually to keep Dilma in power. So this is to say, again, the playing around with colors or node size is actually part of the analytical process and decision, because what you're going to choose will depend on what is important to be highlighted or what story you want to tell about your research. And then again, what is visible but irrelevant? So it seems maybe that these two big clusters are very important, but actually they are not, because remember that I told you that we need to understand how clusters are constituted. These two big clusters are just big because of the act of liking. So which means these two universities has been liking a lot on other pages. So and that's why they are so big. And when you look at cluster formation in terms of reciprocity, actually you see small clusters. So, and to finish, there is another thing that I think that is very important. I mean, I have been actually trying out this for a while, that it's going beyond visual network analysis and having your digital networks as basis for other type of analysis. So, as basis for the scrutiny of textual and visual content, for instance. What I mean by that is, for example, so you study your network, so you analyze your network, and then you can base this study to a second step. So you can go further, you can go in depth. In this case, they conducted textual analysis according to node position, because they were trying to figure out, they were trying to detect different debates or different conversations regarding the self-disclosure post. So they conduct textual analysis depending on the position of the node. Those who has more comments, those who has less, to see if they detect something different. Or you can also go from clusters to image-related content. In this case, what you see is the image is connected to the vegan cluster within climate change network. So This is an exercise, there is no rule for that, but this is an exercise that brings new perspectives on the study of digital networks, and also may enrich your analysis, because you will start studying from a digital network, and then you find yourself moving beyond and using that sort of information that you have, or the insights that you have with your network, to do another sort of analysis. To sum up this short talk, what I actually proposed to do, it was like look what precedes and takes place with and in the analytical approach of digital networks. And in doing that, we somehow sort of dived into the technicity of cross-platform analysis, which is one of my research interests of my current research. And I hope that somehow this proposed framework to approach cross-platform digital networks may help you along this week, considering mapping disparity in cross-platforms, looking at the graphical representation, and adopting a navigational practice to conduct the study of your digital network. Thank you.